in the early dusk of a London afternoon, when the sky hung low and pewter-colored over the streets, humiliation moved as freely as the rain. It followed the young woman through the narrow lane off Cheapside, clinging to her worn cloak and the careful way she held her head, neither bowed nor defiant. People knew her kind at a glance. A seamstress lived by quiet precision, by patience measured in stitches, and by the hope that dignity might someday outweigh poverty. Yet that afternoon, dignity felt thin as the soles of her shoes, soaked through and offering little defense against the cold. She had been turned away only moments earlier from a mercer's shop, whose windows glowed with candlelight and comfort. The shopkeeper's voice still echoed, polite but final, suggesting she return when she could afford better cloth, better credit, better standing. Outside, laughter followed her retreat, light and careless, as though her want were an amusing diversion rather than a private ache. She did not answer it. She had learned that silence was sometimes the last refuge of pride. Rain thickened without warning, striking the cobblestones hard enough to sting. Umbrellas bloomed and collided. Horses snorted, their breath ghosting the air, while drivers shouted for passage. The street became a restless blur of movement, and for a moment she was carried by it, pushed toward shelter she could not afford. Her fingers tightened around the small parcel of unfinished work beneath her cloak, ink-stained from marking seams by candlelight the night before. It was proof of her labor and of her necessity. She saw the carriage, just as her vision blurred with rain. It stood slightly apart from the others, dark and unmarked, its door ajar as if an invitation. In her haste, reason yielded to relief. She assumed it to be a hired conveyance, left briefly unattended in the confusion, and stepped forward with an apology already formed on her lips. The interior received her like another world. Warmth, leather, and a faint trace of polished wood surrounded her, and the noise of the street dulled at once. "I beg your pardon," she began, breathless, before lifting her eyes. He sat opposite her, still as a portrait, his gloved hands resting upon a sheaf of folded papers. The light from the carriage window caught the line of his jaw and the faint silver at his temples. This was no driver, no ordinary gentleman. Authority lay in his posture, in the composed distance of his gaze, and in the cut of his coat, which spoke of tailoring reserved for men who did not need to announce their rank. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Realization struck her with the force of the rain. She had fled. Color drained from her face as she gathered her skirts to retreat, stammering apologies layered upon apologies. The rules of her world were clear, and she had broken them by crossing a boundary not meant for her feet. She expected rebuke, perhaps even anger, and braced herself for it with the practiced resignation of someone long accustomed to being dismissed. Instead, his voice came measured and calm, cutting gently through her panic. He observed the weather, the street, the impracticality of sudden virtue when one was already soaked. His words carried neither indulgence nor accusation, only an unexpected consideration that halted her flight. She hesitated, standing half within the carriage, rainwater darkening the hem of her gown, uncertain whether mercy might itself be a trap. When she finally met his eyes again, she found no mockery there. Curiosity, perhaps, and something quieter still, as though he were weighing her not by appearance, but by the manner in which she bore her mistake. He asked her destination, not her name, and listened when she answered. Her voice, careful and restrained, revealed education earned in fragments, learning stolen between long hours of work. She spoke of her trade because it was what she knew best, because it was safer than speaking of longing. As the carriage rolled forward at his instruction, she noticed the details she had first overlooked. The faint ink smudge on her own fingers mirrored by the ink-stained margin of his papers, the subtle wear at the cuffs of his gloves betraying use rather than vanity. He asked about her work, and she answered plainly, without embellishment or appeal. There was pride there, quiet and unadorned, and it drew his attention more surely than beauty might have done. He was a duke, newly returned from the austere chambers of Parliament, though she did not yet know it. He had been trained to measure people by utility, alliances, and consequence, and to keep sentiment at a disciplined distance. Yet as she spoke, he found his thoughts drifting from legislation and legacy to the fragile courage it took to stand uninvited in another's carriage and still speak with composure. In her, he glimpsed a life governed by effort rather than entitlement, and it unsettled him. When the carriage slowed near her street, she prepared to depart with renewed apology, already bracing for the chill beyond the door. He stopped her once more, not with command but with deliberation. From his coat he produced a card, simple and unadorned save for a seal pressed deep into the paper. He did not offer his name, only the assurance that it represented obligation, not favor, should she ever need honest employment. She accepted it with hands that trembled despite her resolve, unsure whether this gesture marked the end of an embarrassment or the beginning of something far more dangerous. As she stepped back into the rain and the carriage door closed behind her, she did not see him watching through the glass, nor did she know that in offering her shelter, he had quietly invited a reckoning that neither rank nor reason would easily contain. Long after the carriage vanished, the echo of that moment lingered, altering the course of two lives irrevocably in silent anticipation. Days passed, yet the rain-soaked carriage seemed to follow the Duke into every quiet chamber of his life. In the mornings, when pale light crept through tall windows of his town house, he found his thoughts wandering from ledgers and correspondence to the steadiness with which she had spoken of her work. At night, when London softened beneath lamplight, her careful voice returned to him with unwelcome clarity. He had built his reputation upon restraint, yet now restraint required effort, and effort revealed the depth of his disturbance. He told himself that curiosity alone compelled him. A duke was expected to observe the city he governed in spirit, if not in fact, and charity, when properly administered, reflected well upon both conscience and name. Thus reason framed what his heart dared not admit. He sent a discreet inquiry through a charitable registry that supplied work to tradeswomen of reputable character, careful to cloak interest in formality. The answer arrived promptly, neat as a well-cut seam, confirming her employment, her reliability, and her circumstances, which were modest without disgrace. When he next wrote, his hand was steady, his language precise. He requested gloves of a particular make, suitable for winter evenings, and enclosed payment generous enough to be fair without appearing indulgent. He signed only with the seal she had already seen, offering no more intimacy than propriety allowed. The letter was dispatched with other business, yet he watched the courier depart as though some fragile promise rode within the envelope. For her, the arrival of the commission felt unreal. She turned the paper over twice before daring to break the seal, her pulse quickening at the sight of it. Work was work, and she welcomed it as she always did. Yet this order carried weight beyond coin. It spoke of recognition rather than pity, and that distinction mattered. She set to it with care that bordered on reverence, stitching late into the evening, mindful that her hands represented not merely skill, but character. When the gloves were delivered, a note followed in return, brief and exacting in its praise. He remarked upon craftsmanship, upon punctuality, upon the quiet virtue of excellence. Nothing more. Still, she read it more than once, struck by the absence of condescension. In a world accustomed to measuring her worth in pennies, his words weighed something deeper, and she guarded that feeling closely, wary of hope's dangerous ease. Their exchanges continued in this careful manner, each step deliberate, each boundary respected. Yet London, with its sharp eyes and sharper tongues, seldom missed what lay just beneath the surface. A duke's interest, however restrained, seldom went unnoticed. At a charitable assembly held beneath chandeliers heavy with light, she attended in her capacity as a supplier, standing among other women whose labor adorned the event while their presence went largely unseen. Across the room, their gazes met. It was a simple thing, easily overlooked, yet the space between them seemed suddenly charged, as though awareness itself had weight. He inclined his head in acknowledgment, nothing more, but the gesture carried the force of recognition in a place that thrived upon ignoring her kind. Murmurs rippled softly, fans paused mid-motion, and curiosity took root where certainty had once reigned. She felt the shift immediately. A woman of fashion observed her too closely, eyes assessing, lips curving with something not quite a smile. Another whispered behind a gloved hand. The room had not changed, yet she stood differently within it, exposed by association rather than action. When discomfort threatened to send her retreating, She steadied herself with memory of his calm voice in the carriage, the way he had spoken as though she belonged anywhere she stood. He sensed it as well. Duty urged him to remain distant, to preserve order and expectation, but conscience pressed harder. When a pointed remark drifted too near, he intervened with polite authority, redirecting conversation without spectacle. It was a small act, executed with practiced ease, yet it carried consequence. Protection, even subtle, invited interpretation, and interpretation rarely erred on the side of kindness. Later, as the assembly thinned and carriages gathered beneath the night sky, she prepared to leave, determined not to invite further scrutiny. He approached then, not as a benefactor addressing a worker, but as a gentleman mindful of courtesy. His words were measured, offering thanks, nothing more, yet the space between them felt perilously narrow. She answered with equal restraint, aware that every syllable might be weighed by unseen listeners. In the days that followed, rumor grew where silence had been. Questions lingered unasked yet heavy, and glances sharpened into speculation. He was counseled gently, then more firmly, about appearances, about the wisdom of attention misplaced. She felt the change too, sensed in the way doors seemed slower to open, in the careful curiosity of fellow seamstresses who wondered what opportunity might demand in return. When his next note arrived, it was briefer than before, its tone resolute. He requested a meeting, properly chaperoned, in daylight, for reasons of business he did not name. As she folded the paper, her heart beat with equal measures of fear and anticipation. Whatever lay ahead would not be easily undone, for discretion itself had begun to fail, and with its unraveling came the quiet certainty that something irrevocable was already in motion. He waited for her beneath the bare branches of the garden, where winter light fell pale and honest upon the gravel path. The house behind him stood dignified and watchful, its windows reflecting a world governed by lineage and law, while the open air between them promised no such certainty. She approached with measured steps, cloak drawn close, every instinct urging caution even as resolve carried her forward. This meeting, requested so carefully, could not be mistaken for chance. He began at once, as though silence itself might betray him. He spoke of duty, of obligations inherited rather than chosen, and of the increasing scrutiny that followed his every decision. His voice remained even, yet beneath it lived strain, the sound of a man long practiced in restraint now pressed by a feeling he could no longer dismiss. She listened without interruption, her gaze fixed not upon his rank, but upon the effort it cost him to speak so plainly. When he finally named her influence upon his thoughts, he did so without ornament. He confessed that her presence had unsettled him, not through impropriety, but through the quiet challenge she posed to his certainties. He had believed order sufficient for contentment, yet her dignity, preserved against circumstance, revealed the poverty of that belief. The words fell between them like a narrow bridge, inviting crossing while offering no assurance of safety. She answered with honesty equally spare. She spoke of the danger inherent in notice, of how swiftly favor could sour into suspicion, and of her refusal to be regarded as a curiosity, softened by kindness. She would not accept a place that required concealment, nor could she bear to become the cause of his eventual regret. Her life had taught her that affection offered without respect was merely another form of charity, and she had endured enough of that already. He did not interrupt, though each sentence struck with force. When she finished, he acknowledged the truth of her fear, admitting he could promise no path free of consequence. Yet he would not deny what had taken root between them, nor pretend that withdrawal would restore the calm he had lost. He spoke then of choice, not his alone but hers, insisting that whatever followed must be entered openly or not at all. The air seemed to still around them, the distant city, softened by the weight of what had been spoken. She regarded him not as a duke, but as a man standing vulnerable beneath the open sky, risking censure for candor. Her answer came slowly, shaped by caution, yet warmed by hope she scarcely trusted. She agreed to continue, provided their course remained honest, however narrow, and he accepted the condition with visible relief. Their parting was restrained, marked by no touch beyond the briefest brush of gloved fingers, yet the contact lingered as promise rather than farewell. In the days that followed, London hummed with anticipation it could not name. Invitations arrived for him, edged with expectation of advantageous alliance, while she felt attention sharpen rather than fade. Still, he did not retreat. Instead, he claimed space deliberately, allowing her presence to be known without spectacle, a quiet assertion that drew notice without apology. At a formal gathering soon after, he spoke her name aloud before an assembly accustomed to hearing only those of lineage. The sound carried, clear and undeniable, and with it intent he no longer sought to disguise. Murmurs rose, some shocked, others curious, yet he remained composed, his stance a declaration in itself. She stood beside him, aware the room measured her anew, and met its gaze with calm born of hard-won self-respect. Later, away from watchful eyes, he confessed his intention to pursue formal union if she would have it, though he could promise neither ease nor universal approval. The offer was not grand in gesture, but profound in implication, binding his future to hers before a society quick to punish deviation. She did not answer at once, feeling the weight of choice press upon her, heavy with risk and possibility alike. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. She accepted not the title he could grant, but the partnership he offered, contingent upon mutual regard and public acknowledgement. Relief crossed his features, followed by resolve. Yet even as they stood aligned, knowledge lingered that acceptance by one another did not secure acceptance by the world, and beyond the garden walls, consequences gathered, waiting to test the courage they had just claimed.